Welcome to our first lecture in Unit 6, South and East Asia. We'll also study artwork from Southeast Asia and Central Asia, but we're primarily focusing on these regions. But we must begin with the Indus Valley Civilization. So we're looking at the area of Pakistan today. However, it should be noted that South Asia consists of Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and so we're also Sri Lanka, but we're going to focus on Pakistan today, looking at our Indus Valley Civilization, often called the Harappan Civilization as well, but we'll be focusing on Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. However, these are just 2 of 500 sites found across this span of this whole valley. So the Indus River had flowed through this area. This site, or this area, particularly Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were in use for around 500 years. These civilizations thrived. They were pretty much abandoned by 1900, 1800. We're not sure why. Perhaps warfare. There are some later texts that discuss different forms of warfare, and I'll discuss how Harappa seems to support that. But one of the biggest reasons for the decline, and this is a general consensus, is that the path of the Indus River changed. And so they didn't have access to that fresh water. Without water, we can't survive, so thus these areas were abandoned and they moved. Of course, there also could be disease, etc. But for the most part, this movement of the Indus River is associated with the fall of these areas. So this civilization is contemporary with our Mid and Old Kingdom of Egypt, the Sumerian, Akkadian, and Old Babylonian periods that we've studied. So we're heading back to our BCE era, before Common Era. But I want you to keep in mind that although we're just looking at the little that remains, that in fact these were very advanced civilizations, that they were extremely complex, that they had the same human nature that we have, the same dreams and aspirations and philosophies, etc., of trying to understand life. And we're also going to see some precursors to Hinduism here, and of course, which leads to later Buddhism, etc., etc. And so let's discuss the city. These were carefully planned cities. I mean, as you can see with this aerial view, it was in this very defined grid-like pattern. Some of these sites, even the main roads, are about 45 feet wide. So these are complex cities. It was a thriving civilization. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had about a 3-mile circumference of their city, each with around 40,000 people, which is extensive at this time. They even had indoor plumbing. So we often hear that, the Romans invented plumbing, but that's not true. It actually originated in the Indus Valley. Here's an example of the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro. It was associated with a more spiritual practice rather than just like a bathing area or a pool. And it has plumbing. Private homes had plumbing. They had their own wells. They had a cleaning area. They also had examples of toilets. And so the disposal of this waste would have made a significant difference in these ancient cities compared to elsewhere. So they were extremely advanced. We have many examples of grave goods, which attest to their metallurgy skills. I mean, consider the gold items that we're seeing here. We also have materials that provide us insight into their extensive trade systems. We have jade from the Himalayas, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Remember, we studied that with our standard of in ancient Sumeria. We have turquoise from Persia, amethyst from a farther reaching area in India. And so, this was a relatively wealthy area as well, as attested by their trade. We have examples of pottery, dye work. Here we see the metal work, or the bead working, etc., or bead making and metal working, which attests to this stratified society. So let's start with Harappa. And for us to understand, again, the complexity, and just none of these ancient civilizations were primitive by any means. So we really focused on naturalism with ancient Greece a few thousand years later, but I want you to consider some of these smaller objects that have been found here. I mean, look at the naturalism of these two male figures. The central one has this real sense of movement. It's often associated as this dancing figure. We see this red jade here, and where it's in a natural stance. Here it is from different angles and lighting. And so we can see this sense of realism here. The fleshness of the body, the flesh of the body is shown. He has a little bit of a protruding stomach. There's also this sense of asymmetry slightly. So again, they were even attempting these more naturalistic stances, perhaps very similar to the contrapposto pose, which is associated with the Greeks thousands of years later. I think I said red jade, but it's red jasper. My bad. So these were advanced craftsmen and artists. So here is our priest king, a famous artwork from this region. It's hard to find a high-resolution image of it. And so it was first assumed to be a king when it was first found, but now we primarily think that it's likely a priest or a shaman figure, someone associated with the religion, because as you can see, the bottom half of it is missing. Even the front part of it is missing. And there's some pretty good evidence that it was likely kneeling. And so when we consider a kneeling statue compared to other civilizations, even contemporary, it's mostly done so in honor of the gods, of demonstrating reverence for these gods. And so there's an argument that it's more of a priest. The semi-closed eyes also attest to that he may be entering this otherworldly spiritual realm, that he's in this trance-like state. So we have some new terms here. The trefoil, this is this design on his garment. Fillet, we've seen before with the archaic period even, with ancient Greece, of this band tied around the head. And so we have these elements of some stylized elements. There's an attempt at, we can recognize that this is a human, but we're not at the same realm of naturalism as the previous torso we looked at. So we see the stylized beard, the trefoil design on his cloak that he's wearing. He's wearing some jewelry. So he seems to be an important person. Now we can get textiles for very cheap, but for most of time, especially with these designs on this textile, this pattern, this addition, indicates that it's an extremely expensive article of clothing. So this individual was important. Oh, I forgot to mention there's also some traces of red. So, like most of the ancient world, this would have been painted. We have some examples of some fertility figures, at least that's what we've designated them as throughout this area. These are some terracotta, this baked clay. And so we see the emphasis on the hips and on the breasts and on the arms. And so our automatic assumption is that these are associated with fertility. The figure on the left is wearing this elaborate necklace and headdress. So it may be some type of goddess figure. And this really corresponds or parallels previous goddess figures that we looked at in the ancient Near East. So we're going to move into Mohenjo-Daro. And the reason why we're moving into this area is because there isn't as much excavation in Harappa. We looked at a couple artworks, but what's really interesting, a side note, is we can't study this region because of how radioactive it is. Harappa has very high levels of radiation. And so archaeologists can't stay there. And what's really interesting is some of our later Hindu texts, such as the Bhagavad Gita, describes what sounds like nuclear warfare. And so we have this site that has other examples, evidence of perhaps other force trying to destroy them. Even so much, you may have seen the movie recently about Robert Oppenheimer of the Manhattan Project and the nuclear bomb. He was fluent in Sanskrit, and he often quoted the Bhagavad Gita and these lines that reflect the destruction that seems to mimic some type of nuclear warfare. So we have no idea. There's examples of what we think is the language of this region, but we haven't deciphered it yet. So this is up to speculation, but it's really interesting how it's too radioactive to even study. So let's head into Mohenjo-Daro and looking at our dancing figure. So this is a bronze sculpture, attesting to their artistic skills and the details that we see here. It's one of 2 bronze artworks that we found. It has these large eyes, this flat nose, these healthy cheeks, curly hair, a broad forehead. She's pretty tall with these long limbs. She has a high neck. And she wears about 25 different bangles or bracelets, which is popular in India still today. And she's holding another object in her left hand. We're not sure what it is. And this was an important discovery because now we know that they knew about metal blending, casting, and these other sophisticated metallurgy techniques and methods. So she's described as dancing. Part of the reason is likely the amount of bangles on her arm and what she's holding in her hand. So there's this impression of sound that we get. I always like the elaborate hairstyle that we see, at least primarily on the back of her head. But again, so these are an advanced this is an example of advanced artistry and craftsmanship. Here is our cylinder seal that we're going to look at. The person in a seated yogic pose. There are many cylinder seals, and these are familiar from Mesopotamia that we've studied, so the 2 were obviously in communication with one another. But we're going to show this as not only an argument that the top symbols are an example of written language, which we haven't deciphered yet, but also we're seeing some imagery here that is a precursor to Hinduism. So this seal shows a seated figure with 3 faces. 1, 2, 3. He is sitting on an elaborate throne here in this interesting asana, seated position. He is wearing this horned headdress. There's a cluster of feathers or perhaps this type of leafy branches or motif on top. He's adorned with many necklaces. His arms are covered in bangles, just like our dancing figure. And he's surrounded by 4 wild animals: the elephant, rhinoceros, tiger, and water buffalo. Powerful animals. Again, this sense of power is associated with him. And, below his throne is a pair of ibexes, which hopefully you remember from our study of prehistoric art. And he's in this, what's called an asana, this seated position of meditation. Our later Vedic texts talk about how, or you may often hear of yoga, and the asana is associated in modern day as being a pose of yoga. But in all the actual texts relative to this philosophy, asana only means a seated position, and there are numerous seated positions. And then you get into these different types of asanas to meditate. So our modern notions of all these different types of physical positions are not ancient by any means. They're primarily from the 19th century and a mix of British military drills during their occupation there to help with the sedentary lifestyle of the modern era. Anyway, so here we have the original asana, where he's in this seated position of meditation. And so one of the theories is that it's the Trimurti of Shiva. And this is where this is a Hindu god, one of the important ones. And he's showing the trinity of his cosmic functions of creation, preservation, and destruction. And this image on the right from the Elephanta Caves is one of the images we will study with Hindu art. But there's an argument, of this being a precursor in which Hinduism relies upon for certain imagery. We'll discuss the sheer amount of iconography in Hindu and Buddhist art. But here we have our cylinder seal to wrap up our Harappa, or Indus Valley civilization.